animation is pretty amazing, am I right? Ever since the early 1900s, we have seen the incredible growth of animation, starting from simple drawings being adjusted frame by frame, to now having the ability to breathe life into any fictional character. It's quite amazing, honestly, how multiple drawings can be combined together to create what is essentially life. Obviously, it takes an insane amount of talent, skills, and dedication, but the end results can be, quite frankly, breathtaking. Basically, if you can't tell, I love animation. So many of my favorite movies and shows are animated, like the Spider-Verse movies, Arcane, The Secret of Nim, Beauty and the Beast, and just so many more that I cannot possibly name all at once. Now, if you were to ask me about the current state of animation, well, that's a whole other story. It's very obvious that Hollywood is in a very weird spot where movies are becoming way too expensive to make, AI being a looming threat for jobs, but most importantly, animation has just not been taken that seriously lately. A lot of recent animated films from studios like Disney, Pixar, DreamWorks, and Illumination have been, well, a very mixed bag to say the least. And it's clear as day that a lot of studios just don't really put in that much effort into their animated movies, cause to simply put it, they just don't really care. And of course, this is all just incredibly frustrating. It's a shame that Hollywood just doesn't really see the potential in animation. But one thing we gotta keep in mind is that animation has always had its highs and lows. And, well, to understand where I'm coming from, we're gonna have to rewind a wee bit. The current time period is the 1970s, and animation is in a very bad spot right now. Walt Disney is dead, and the studio can't recapture the magic they had when Walt was around. Warner Brothers has stopped producing theatrical Looney Tunes shorts and instead gave them really bad and lazy TV programs. And animation shown on TV was severely censored and very limited in terms of budgets. Gone were the golden days of animation, and now we were in what was essentially the Great Depression. That was until this man came onto the scene. His name is Ralph Baskhi. During the 1970s and 80s, he was one of the very few animation directors who was able to produce his own animated movies that are both critical and box office hits. But not only were they successful, they were weird, raunchy, gross, and very adult. He believed that animation should not just be limited to kids, and that adults can also enjoy animation. This led to Ralph creating what are, in my opinion, some of the most unique, creative, and even groundbreaking animated movies of all time. You have Fritz the Cat, Heavy Traffic, Street Fight, Wizards, American Pop, and even Cool World. It's clear that while Ralph may be a wee bit insane, he is no doubt a genius. And it's fairly obvious that I'm going to be talking about one of his movies in this video, but which one exactly? Throughout his career, he produced 9 full-length animated movies, so which one do I think is the most important animated movie of all time? Well, in my opinion, I believe it to be his version of The Lord of the Rings. Yes, really. Now usually, when we think of Lord of the Rings, we usually think of the Peter Jackson trilogy. These movies were a huge deal for the time and are still seen as masterpieces to this day. From the acting, characters, set design, music, story, effects, and direction, these 3 movies really left a massive impact on pop culture. But it feels like people forget just how many versions of Lord of the Rings were made before Peter Jackson came in. Most of them, however, were cheap television specials usually being produced in European countries. The first adaptation was a short animated film based on The Hobbit in 1967. But it's so shit you can barely even call it animated. Then a decade later in 1977, Rankin Bass had created their own version of The Hobbit, and all I know about it is that the design of Mip from Smiling Friends was inspired by how Bilbo looked in this special, and then we get Ralph Baskhi's version. This film has always garnered very mixed responses from people. A lot of fans usually point to the weak pacing, strange animation style, and how rushed the story is. And yeah, I know that this film has flaws, it's by no means perfect. But I really think that this film deserves a lot more credit. This film did a lot of things that you rarely saw in many animated films from around the time. It took risks and was not afraid to take itself seriously. Now I know all the diehard Jackson fans are typing out their angry comments right now, so just please let me explain why Ralph Baskhi's Lord of the Rings is one of, if not the most important animated movies of all time. Now I'm sure that everyone knows the story about Lord of the Rings, right? To put it very simply, some lads have to travel around Middle Earth and destroy the evil ring. Now that's me condensing the story down as briefly as I can. Explaining the full entire story would take God knows how long. Now this particular film is an adaptation of 2 of the books, Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers. Bakshi, however, never got to adapt Return of the King. Instead, Rankin Bass made their own version, the same people who made The Hobbit. And it's certainly an interesting watch? Yeah, it's very interesting. Now, I will say this, trying to adapt 2 large books into a 2-hour animated movie was never gonna work. And while I was watching the film, I did notice certain points where the pacing was really rushed. It's not awful, but it's distracting. Characters don't really get a lot of time to work off each other, scene transitions are jarring and confusing, the world building isn't as strong as the Jackson films, and it just feels really weird sometimes. But having said all that, I'll admit that it's rather impressive what they were able to do with a 2-hour runtime. While a lot of scenes were rushed here, there are also a lot of scenes where they take their time and let viewers get immersed into this world. The film has a lot of show-don't-tell moments that are done extremely well. Certain moments that come to mind would be one of the scenes where Gimli finds out that his cousin died. Instead of crying or playing dramatic music or making a big deal out of it, he just kind of walks away in silence. You can tell just by looking at his facial expressions that he is clearly heartbroken, but that's all they needed to do. Or the scene where they arrive in Lothlorien after Gandalf had fallen with the dragon. The whole scene is very whimsical yet kind of haunting. There's this one really short yet kind of beautiful sequence where the characters just sort of play around and process what just happened. You can see them slowly bonding and having fun with each other. It also helps that there's a song in the background called Mithrandir. They play it very briefly, but man, it really adds to the scene. It is an amazing song. There's also the scene later on where, oh, hold on, spoiler alert, 3, 2, 1, where Boromir dies. Again, they don't play out the dramatic music or have all the characters crying. It's a very quiet yet really effective moment. Seeing this character that we've grown to love slowly die and all of his friends just taking it all in is kind of beautiful. All these moments, in my opinion, really add to the feeling of this movie. It's not afraid to be slow, dramatic, and give viewers the time to process what they are seeing. To give you a better idea of what I'm talking about, let's say you were to watch an old Disney movie that was an adaptation of a book. You would notice just how much they deviate from the original source material. A lot of these old stories were dark, mature, and kind of fucked up. But when Disney adapted them, they became very bright, colorful, and always made sure they had a happy ending, focusing more on comedy and having funny characters rather than being a faithful adaptation. Which is fine, and it clearly worked for Disney. But with Lord of the Rings, trying to tone down the drama and make it more comedic and lighthearted would just not work for the type of story they were adapting. Baskhi knew that he couldn't make the film similar to something like Fritz the Cat, so he went out to stay as faithful to the books as he possibly could. The characters speak in this very grand and epic manner. They don't shy away from the more darker elements or try to make it more comedic. They made an adaptation that felt like the book was being directly translated to the screen. This was very uncommon to see in most animated movies at the time, or hell, even most live-action movies. But okay, looking past the story, what about the characters? In the original Peter Jackson trilogy, the characters are without doubt the most important and memorable parts. We all know about Gollum, Frodo, Gandalf, Legolas, Aaragon, and just all the other characters. And with Ralph Baskhi's version, the characters are certainly not as well defined as they are in the Jackson movies, but I really do believe that there's something special with them here. Now, when talking about this particular film, especially its characters and the flaws, almost everyone points at Sam. And yeah, I will admit, he can be quite annoying sometimes. I know that Sam is not meant to be the sharpest tool in the shed, but man, they really made him a bit too goofy here. But I can defend him. For starters, I think the film does an excellent job of showing Sam's loyalty towards Frodo. Every scene he's in with Frodo, he is always looking out for him and defending him no matter what. He's annoying, yeah, but it's kind of admirable how much he cares for Frodo and wants to be by his side no matter what they go through. And he is not completely useless. He's always trying to fight back and he can defend himself. Kind of. I guess Sam is meant to be the sort of comedic relief here, but when you compare him to other comedic reliefs in animated movies, he's honestly way better and he could have been much worse, let's be real here. The rest of the characters are also really damn good. It's impressive how, despite their short runtime and number of main characters, they all get somewhat fleshed out and no one feels out of place here. There is a small bit of time to have characters talk to each other and learn about their relationships together. It can be quite rushed sometimes, I will say that, but again, the movie is only 2 hours long, so what can you do? But one aspect that everyone can agree on is the voice acting and how incredible it is. I'm not joking when I say that this film has some of the greatest acting I've seen in any animated film. They brought in talent like John Hurt, Anthony Daniels, William Squire, just name a few. They all speak in such a grand, epic, and expressive way. Again, if you were to look at other animated films from around this time, animated characters would typically speak in a very whimsical and cartoony way, trying to be very over-exaggerated and goofy. Even Disney films that were more serious, like The Black Cauldron for example, they had voices that were very cartoony and may not have fit the tone that well. But with this movie, all the voice actors do an amazing job of making us believe that these characters are real. I think my favorite performance would have to be John Hurt as Aaragon. Holy shit, what a performance. He can make Aaragon sound threatening and intimidating, but also very soft and gentle when the character needs to be. It's a voice performance that I believe has never been topped, and I wish more people would recognize how amazing it really is. But now it's time to cover a certain aspect of the movie that everyone loves to make fun of, and that is of course the animation. Now, just by taking a quick glance at the animation here, you can tell that something is just a bit off. It's not bad per se, it just looks, well, strange. And that is mainly because the film is animated using rotoscoping. For those who are unaware of what rotoscoping is, it's basically when animators film actors performing as the animated characters, then they draw over them. You can see this style used in a lot of old Disney movies for certain characters who had more realistic and human proportions. Now, it goes without saying that rotoscoping is a major pain in the arse, but it can lead to some great results. And The Lord of the Rings was one of the very few movies where nearly the entire film is rotoscoped. And it led to some, well, rather interesting results. It feels like whenever someone talks about this movie, they always make fun of the rotoscoping animation, saying how ugly it looks, and they always show the same weird frames, which are usually of Legolas for some reason. And yes, these frames are incredibly goofy, and especially some of the shots here. Like, what is this? But at the same time, it feels like people are overlooking just how impressive the rest of the film looks. While the characters do move realistically, they still have appealing designs that can match the way they move. They can all inhabit such an incredible wide range of facial expressions and emotions. Like I said earlier, the film is very show don't tell, and the animation does an excellent job on showing us how the characters are feeling. Like going back to the scene where Boromir dies, look at Aragorn's face here. He doesn't say a single word, yet you can tell that he is both shocked, confused, and really upset. Of course, the animation does have its weak points. Like, you can clearly tell when certain characters aren't animated and it's just live action footage being solarized. It can work on certain characters like the orcs who are meant to look otherworldly and weird. But for the more human characters, it does look out of place, especially for some of the more cartoony and expressive designs. But the animation really shines during the battle scenes, especially the one near the end. Again, you can tell that a lot of what we're seeing is just footage of actors being solarized, but man, does it feel massive. It's still amazing the sheer size of the battle and how they're able to achieve this back then. Even the backgrounds here are really impressive. They do change style throughout the film, which you think would be distracting, but no, not at all. When the background changes style, it attempts to match the tone of the location the characters are in, and it's incredibly effective when they want to show off a more calm and safe environment, then show off a more dark and sketchy environment. With a lot of animated movies trying to stick to the same style all the time, it's nice seeing a film that isn't afraid to change things up a bit. So, after all that yapping, why exactly do I think this is one of the most important anime movies of all time? Well, obviously, you would have somewhat of an idea if you watched the entire video and paid attention. Shame on you artists and gamers who have this on as background noise. Put down your pen or controller and look at me. You looking at me? Alright, good. Anyway, what I really appreciate about this film is just how ahead of its time it was and how they did a lot of things that were very uncommon for its time. Back in 1978, you would rarely see an animated film that looked like this, had such mature dialogue and dramatic moments, while also still being suitable for kids. But after this movie came out and proved to be a box office hit, we slowly saw more and more animators embrace more dark and mature stories, or having characters speak in a more dramatic way, or having a more unique style of animation. They all started doing it after this film came out. Now, I'm not saying that all these animators were directly inspired by this movie, but I feel like it really did change the way stories could be told through animation and even live action. It's no secret that Peter Jackson got into Lord of the Rings through this movie, which of course inspired him to make his own set of movies, and these movies changed the way people viewed not only the fantasy genre, but movies in general. So when you think about it, this one single movie that not many people seem to care about did so much for animation and also cinema. And hey, if you want to watch a movie for yourself, then it's on HBO Max, so go give it a watch. Anyway, that's all for me today. I'll see you later, folks.